Hi everyone! So in past episodes, we've talked a lot about the history of the land that we call Canaan. We've seen it from its earliest days of development up to the time that it became part of the Egyptian Empire, a period that stretched at least 6,000 or 7,000 years, if not more. However, the events that marked the beginning of the 12th century BCE, mainly the arrival of the so-called Sea Peoples, the complete collapse of the Hittite Empire, and the loss of Egypt's own imperial possessions in the Levant, completely changed the political and demographic landscape of the region forever. It essentially created a new Canaanite society that was both deeply divided and impoverished. Evidence of this is present in both the archaeological record and from the relative absence of references to the region in the textual sources of the Egyptians and the Assyrians. However, it's in the aftermath of the late Bronze Age collapse that the formation and rise of several new and independent states emerged: Israel, Judah, Moab, Edom, Ammon, and others. Though sharing many aspects of the same Canaanite culture, similar languages, religion, and as we'll see, a common history, each of these states eventually developed their own separate identities. In this program, we'll take a quick look at some of these Iron Age kingdoms that sprung up in central and southern Canaan. South of the Dead Sea was the land called Edom, whose name is derived from a word meaning red, a reference probably to the color of the area's sandstone mountains. Archaeologists believe that the Edomites were a Semitic-speaking, semi-nomadic people who most likely entered into the region of the Negev desert sometime around 1300 BCE. They first appear in the written records of Pharaoh Merneptah, who claims to have granted many Edomites access to the pasture lands of the eastern Nile Delta. This was probably around the year 1210 or 1205 BCE. However, for the next few centuries after that, there's not much historical or archaeological information about them. They do though appear quite frequently in the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, where they're one of the subject peoples of King David of Israel. Eventually, when the kingdom of Israel was split into two, Edom became part of Judah. By the year 845 BCE, they had become independent of Judah, only to lose this in the next century to the Assyrians. A wealthy land due in part to its copper mines, Edom seems to have flourished under Assyrian rule. The same though can't be said for its time under the Neo-Babylonian Empire, when around 586 BCE, the kingdom was completely destroyed. Whatever remained was later absorbed into the Persian satrapy of Eber-Nari, which basically oversaw the Levant from Damascus. East of the Dead Sea was the kingdom of Moab, whose first historical reference dates to the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses II during the Late Bronze Age. His inscriptions and records mention military campaigns in both Moab and Edom during his reign between the years 1290 to 1224 BCE. Though the records state that he campaigned there, an actual kingdom may not have arisen until several centuries later. In the Hebrew Bible Old Testament tradition, Moab was conquered in what's believed to be the early 10th century BCE by the Israelite king David. However, about a century later, a certain Mesha became king of Moab and regained its independence from Israel. We learn about this actually from one of the few contemporary historical sources that coincides with the biblical tradition, a black basalt monument called the Mesha Stele or the Moabite Stone. Found in Moab's ancient capital of Dibon and dating to around 830 BCE, the stele celebrates Mesha's various achievements, including establishing Moabite independence from Israel with the help of the god Chemosh. Here's a partial translation of the text. I am Mesha, the son of Chemosh, the king of Moab, the Dibonite. My father was king over Moab for 30 years, and I was king after my father. And I made this high place for Chemosh in Karcho, because he has delivered me from all kings, and because he has made me look down on all my enemies. Omri was the king of Israel, and he oppressed Moab for many days, for Chemosh was angry with his land. And his son succeeded him, and he said, I will oppress Moab. In my days did he say so, But I look down on him and on his house, and Israel has gone to ruin. Yes, it has gone to ruin forever. Later Assyrian annals state that Moab was one of the lands conquered during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III between the years 734 to 732 BCE. Like Edom, it was absorbed into the Neo-Babylonian Empire and later into the Persian satrapy of Ebir-Nari. The kingdom called Ammon occupied the region east of the Jordan River and northeast of the Dead Sea. Its chief city, Rabbot Ammon, is the site of the modern-day Jordanian capital of Amman. Probably created by the combination of several nearby settlements towards the end of the Late Bronze Age, Ammon reached its peak between the 8th and 6th centuries BCE, as can be seen by the remnants of Rabbot Ammon's great acropolis and lower city. Most of what we know about Ammon comes from the textual sources of others. It's mentioned in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament as both being the enemy and subject of the Israelites, though there's little archaeological evidence to go along with the biblical narrative. Assyrian records from the 9th century BCE give a bit more detail, and it's from them that we have the names of several Ammonite kings. One of them is a certain Baasa, who fought with the coalition of other Levantine states at the Battle of Karkar in 853 BCE against the army of the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III. Though that particular battle ended up in a stalemate, eventually, Ammon did succumb to Assyrian rule until the 6th century BCE, when it became a vassal of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. However, when Babylon was conquered in 539 BCE by Cyrus the Great, Ammon as a political entity came to an end, and was absorbed into the larger Persian satrapy of Ebir-Nari, much like the other small kingdoms of the region. Another small kingdom that we unfortunately don't know too much about is Gilead. It occupied a very strategic position on what's known as the King's Highway, which was a route that linked Damascus with the Gulf of Aqaba. According to biblical tradition, it was a subject of the Kingdom of Israel until it fell to the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III in the year 732 BCE, after which many of its people were deported to other parts of the Assyrian Empire. And now we come to the two most famous of all of the kingdoms of ancient Canaan, those of Israel and Judah. The earliest mention of the name Israel is in an early 13th century BCE granite stele of Pharaoh Merneptah that was discovered in the Egyptian city of Thebes. Now keep in mind, this is not the mention of a kingdom called Israel, but a people of that name. You may remember from earlier programs that in Canaan during the Late Bronze Age, there were many groups of people, often on the margins of society, who lived outside of the major Canaanite cities and were not part of any kingdom or state. The early Israelites are believed to have initially been such a people. The nation-state, or Kingdom of Israel, came later on, after the Bronze Age collapse, and according to some scholars, was probably established around the year 1000 BCE. In all honesty, the only information that we have about this stage in Israel's history comes from the stories that appear in the Bible about Saul, David, Solomon, and a united kingdom with Jerusalem as its capital. I'm not going to go into much detail with regard to these stories because I'm sure that many of you may already be familiar with them. For this program though, just know that eventually, the kingdom split into two, with Israel in the north, centered around its new capital at Samaria, and the kingdom of Judah in the south, with its capital at Jerusalem. While at the moment there's been little archaeological evidence discovered with regard to the earliest history of these two kingdoms, their later history is much better documented. One of these has to do with the reign of King Omri of Israel. Most of the scholars I've read put his date at around 885 to 874 BCE, so I'm going to use that here. His reign is the first for which we have solid evidence of a northern kingdom called Israel. Historically, Omri and his descendants reigned during a very dangerous period in Israel's history because the kingdom was caught between the two great powers of Egypt to its southwest and the Assyrian Empire, which was encroaching upon the Levant from the east. Omri's successor, Ahab, was a member of the great anti-Assyrian coalition that fought against Shalmaneser III at the Battle of Karkar in 853 BCE. Though temporarily able to maintain their independence from Assyria, the kingdom soon got into conflicts with its former Aramaean allies, and by the time of the usurper king Yehu, probably sometime in the 830s BCE, Israel was paying tribute to the Assyrians. In fact, Yehu is depicted as bowing before the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III on his famous black obelisk, currently in the British Museum. For over a century, the Assyrians regularly called the northern kingdom of Israel the House of Omri, and even the usurper Yehu, who was not even a member of that dynasty, was called by them Son of Omri. Yehu was king from about 841 to 814 BCE, and from his reign to about 740 BCE, the kingdom of Israel enjoyed varying degrees of autonomy, although the Assyrians still claimed sovereignty over them and the other kingdoms in the region. Things though drastically changed during the regime and heavy-handed rule of the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III, who reigned between 745 to 727 BCE. Both Israel and Judah paid tribute rather than incur the wrath of the Assyrian king. However, upon his death, the kingdom of Israel and others in the Levant took their chances with his successor, Shalmaneser V, and at least initially began to withhold their tribute. This obviously was unacceptable, and so the Assyrian army came in full force to punish its rebellious vassals. This was the beginning of the end of the kingdom of Israel. It's not exactly clear who was responsible for Israel's final demise, as the fall of the capital of Samaria is actually claimed by two Assyrian kings, both of whom were rivals and probably hated each other. The first seems to have been Shalmaneser V, one of the sons of Tiglath-Pileser III. A Babylonian chronicle states the following. On the 25th day of the month Tebet, Shalmaneser ascended the throne in Assyria and Akkad. He ravaged Samaria. The 5th year, Shalmaneser died in the month of Tebet. For 5 years, Shalmaneser ruled Akkad and Assyria. On the 12th day of the month Tebet, Sargon ascended the throne in Assyria. Shalmaneser V died or was killed, and soon his brother, Sargon II, who many believe to have been a usurper, became the new king of Assyria. Sargon makes the claim that it was he who put the final nail in the coffin of the kingdom of Israel, and in his annals gives us quite a few details of the event. In the beginning of my reign, when I took my seat on the royal throne and was crowned with a lordly crown, the Sumerians, who agreed with another hostile king not to continue their slavery and not to deliver tribute, and who started hostility, I fought with them and completed their defeat. 27,280 people who lived therein, with their chariots, I carried off as spoil. 50 chariots for my royal bodyguard I mustered from among them, and the rest of them I settled in the midst of Assyria. The city of Samaria I resettled and made it greater than before. People of the lands conquered by my own hand I brought there. And so ended the kingdom of Israel. Its cousin to the south, the kingdom of Judah, fared much better. It had refrained from antagonizing Assyria outright, and was thus spared the latter's wrath during the Levantine rebellions of the early 720s BCE. However, about 2 decades later, under King Hezekiah, Judah, along with many Phoenician and Philistine cities, rebelled against Sargon II's son, Sennacherib. In 701 BCE, Sennacherib came personally to the region and crushed all opposition with the exception of Judah. While the Assyrians destroyed the Judean city of Lachish, they couldn't conquer the capital of Jerusalem, and eventually departed east for Assyria. It seems that unrest in Babylonia had compelled Sennacherib to hastily depart east, allowing the kingdom of Judah, unlike Israel, to live to fight another day. Eventually, though, Judah submitted to Sennacherib's successor, Esarhaddon, and remained part of the Assyrian network of vassals and tributary states, which included Tyre, Byblos, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ammon, Edom, and Moab. For a while after the Assyrian Empire's demise in 610 BCE, Judah became a vassal of Egypt. This, though, wasn't for very long. In 586 BCE, Judah was conquered by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II, who destroyed Jerusalem and deported most of its population to Babylonia. This began the period known as the Babylonian captivity or exile, which ended in 539 BCE when the Achaemenid Persian king Cyrus II, also known as Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon and within a year allowed the Israelites to return home if they wished. What happened afterwards is a story for another program. Thanks so much for stopping by the channel. I really appreciate it. If you learned something or simply just enjoyed the video, please don't hesitate to hit that like button because it helps the channel out a lot. Also check out the History with Sai podcast where I go into more detail with regard to some of the topics discussed here. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Take care and stay safe.